Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 378 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to upgrade our plastic output by using butane, as well as start collecting Muon catalysts in preparation for deuterium power. Enjoy! If we could get 2 belts out of this whole setup, that would be amazing. I'm guessing that won't be possible, but let's see what we can do. This setup was built with basically top tier machines already, but we do have one more tier of module. So we can do a quick check by seeing that this would consume 6.5 of each resource. So if we maxed it out with productivities, it's still 6.5. We just get a higher output, which makes sense. That's what productivities do, and they were already at the machine's minimum speed. Let's just get rid of all this stuff because I don't feel like scrolling down constantly to see what's in the list. So if we do this, we can upgrade all these, and I guess we'll check where currently we're getting about 276 liquid plastic, and you have to divide that by 10 to find out how much actual plastic. So that would be about 27 plastic a second. And doing that turns it into about 35. And the same would basically happen with these liquefiers down here. They're already at the minimum crafting speed. So putting in the better modules is simply going to give us more plastic on the way out. Of course, now we'd have to figure out what to do about this because we need an even higher output, but we have a higher tier machine and higher tier modules, so we might be able to get it down to 1 belt per machine. So if we hit everything, that's essentially what we're getting here. We'll have to run a second belt. It is unfortunate that the train station is so far away. It would be nice if we could reuse an existing station here, and I think I'll do that. That we were previously delivering these byproducts to get processed. Because this is basically being done on site to save logistics, since it crunches down so much, it means we essentially don't need these stations anymore. So let's turn the trains off. Let's rename this one to Plastic Load 2. We need to make it an LTN station, so let's kind of copy how things were done here. Right out of the gate, it would be nice if we could improve the throughput of the station. It is plastic, so it will go fast, but giving it 2 extra inserters will make it process very quickly. Luckily, loading stations are a lot easier than unloading stations. Okay, well, this thing is going to be positively supercharged because it's going to get 2 whole green belts of input here. So there we go. Now it's being made available to the network. Well, if these were faced the right way, though. And we do want to limit these to the size of a train, which would be 80. And actually, it looks like it already made a request here. Where'd the train get pulled from? Wow, that came from really far away, but it worked. So that's 35 there, 43 there, so it's really only just barely more than 1 belt right now. So this is about what we would expect, but we're going to have more liquid plastic when we're processing the butane. And we have to go back to our plastic setup, which luckily is still in here, where we have it calculated. So the best thing is to remove it and then process our butane. The first step is to steam crack it into benzene. We do have a higher tier steam cracker, but that gets it down to 2, and will create some residual gas for the other processes. And that benzene needs to get turned into phenol with a yellow metal catalyst and oxygen. And then the phenol is one of the ingredients in liquid plastic 3. So we'll crank it up with productivity modules, and we'll need to find a place for all those chemical plants. But you can see that this is going to create basically 100 plastic a second. But it does have an input requirement. Now it's going to need the formaldehyde, which comes from methanol, which we'll be able to steal from the rest of the setup, because we're going to need 260 methanol a second, and we're actually making 840. So that won't be an issue either. Okay, then we have a setup, and it's relatively straightforward here. But for now, it's time to remove this setup here. And I'm not too worried about saving this energy. So let's just pull it out. It's actually kind of amazing how small a lot of this is going to be. Really, the only big part is going to be the plastic. And we will need some additional steam. But we actually have a higher tier of electric boiler now. Guess we'll see if they get here. So we've upgraded our oxygen production now. And this setup will run to fill up oxygen. So, no special logic required. So that gets us half of the output that we need for this plastic. And it has 2 input requirements, which is going to be similar to this setup here. So let's just grab a bunch of it. And we need to figure out how to get 40 of them in here. And how many is that? Oh, it's actually 42. I really hope all those pipes are good. Of course, can't really tell yet. And because we're dealing with a byproduct here, we do have a top-up valve, so I don't want to break that logic. So we'll keep it. And I don't know, this might be kind of weird, but we'll do an overflow valve into a top-up valve. My idea here is that we want to make sure we have at least 80 fluid in here. And then if it is in there, it will be allowed to flow into this set and get it up to 80%. The reason why is because methanol is also a byproduct from down here, so we need to leave the space for it to go in. And we actually need a green metal catalyst for this, which is the first time we would have been using it in this area. So that means our plastic setup is also using all 4 catalyst types. I guess we'll just kind of put it up here since the space exists. And we might need to have some other priority to make sure butane actually gets processed, but I'm kind of hoping the whole thing will just sort of fix itself, because now the butane goes in and we're making a great deal of liquid plastic. And this output rate is going to be very high, so I kind of want to try to spread the load a little bit. And finally, we'll connect it. So it may not be fully compressed because of pipe limitations, but this is all going at full blast, making use of that butane. And it looks like we never received better boilers. So let's jump in here, and I guess since we're next to the rockets, we can see that we're almost up to 400,000 now of our space science. Seems like we don't have any rocket control units, but we're just receiving a train. The problem with these units is that they're logistically hard to deliver because they only stack in units of 10. So we have to constantly send trains, and sometimes they just fall behind. It's kind of unfortunate, but I'm not sure how else to solve that. I actually even made 2 requests for these on this station just to try to have a big buffer. You see how quickly it's done. And the problem it has is that this one station is supplying our entire factory's worth of circuits. And the problem is it just gets very busy sometimes because, you know, this warehouse is good to go again. Also, LTN needs to actually make the request, and I have the settings set pretty slow just to minimize the effect on UPS. So some amount of hiccups are occurring, and I'm guessing we're probably not hitting our 2 rockets a minute, even though we are up to 894. But it seems like the production rate is going just fine, at least compared to how fast we're doing the faster than light theory. So I don't really see the need to try to supercharge it right now, because it just doesn't seem like it's an issue. And as usual, we're waiting on speed modules. But important to note is that we're not making speed modules, so we've got to follow this back. It looks like no crystals is my guess. Looks like we're out of a lot of crystals, so something got clogged here. Let's figure it out. Well, down here they stopped because there's no crystal slurry, which is weird because crystal slurry should be something we're making a lot of, but it isn't. And I see that we have no input. From up here. We have all of this crystal dust in here, and it was running just to make sure we had enough leaves, but there's probably 2 conditions that it needs to turn on for now. One of them is that we are low on those leaves. The other one is that this belt is not fully populated. Take the wire from over there. So if crystal dust is less than 200, make a green square. So the green square has to be more than 0. Because this setup is here both to supply nutrient pulp for the fish and the other crystal elements, but also to provide the slurry so we can properly grind the crystals. So when all that runs, it will eventually get back to where it needs to go. So we had a little slowdown there. Let's make the boiler 3s, and we don't need very many of them, so that one request will be fine. And it looks like power output has stabilized. Of course, now that we're using a ton of power and essentially always running them, that things are pretty good now. This last set hasn't run in a while. I guess it has to get below 30 for that to go. Our other uranium processes are actually running rather aggressively right now. Very aggressively, in fact. Every single 234 reactor is going, because they need to run to either handle byproducts or create input requirements for thorium, so it's going pretty good. And in fact, we are starting to collect some 234s, so if they actually make it back here, then that means we need more reactors. But we can use this to determine that if we ever see a uranium-234 on here, or even 235 to the same extent, it means we don't have enough reactors. And a reason why we're running it so often now is probably because we are generating plutonium the most efficient way, using just uranium-238, but doing that requires a lot of 238. So as those run, we are producing more uranium which can be burned. We probably want to leave this plastic station down here, because we're still making plastic from our old fuel setup here, just as it runs to create other things that are required. So it still shoots out a little bit. So actually our ability to make plastic is quite expanded now. At least it's nice to get rid of this giant belt. I'm never very happy about very long belts going along the factory. I feel like that's the easy way out, that you really should have done something that had logistics on it instead. So the fact that it's gone now is pretty neat. And we are definitely making lots of plastic. Has all of this kind of balanced out? Kind of. I mean, we're full on butane still. There's always going to be a limiting factor. Part of it could be you're plugged up on plastic, so there's no output requirement. So this gas is being constantly shot in from the science bus, which means its balance is always being messed with a little bit, and I am noticing here that we're actually quite short on carbon, because there's no purified water. That's an odd thing to be out of. Is that saline water then? That's the issue? And our factory does attempt to save it whenever possible, but it's odd that it's just not using it right now. But this is easily solved with a salination plant. So let's plop it in there with an overflow, which will hopefully be enough to smooth this out, because we definitely need salt pretty much all of the time and for everything. So we want to keep making it. Some good news is that our massive expansion of landfill is continuing. Right now we have enough reactors, but having more space here for more reactors could potentially be useful rather soon. So let's check up on all of our science outputs here. The blue is patchy, which isn't right. It's short on the laser arrays. The laser arrays need their flash fuel, and the flash fuel is out of naphtha. There's so much piecemeal going on in here. But I think we're good, and also naphtha is finally caught up. So, I think it has been fixed. Pretty much, because our blue science is more or less maxed out. It'll take some time for that to smooth out. And we're up to 53 gigawatts, and only 4 of that is charging the accumulators. So that's about 50 gigawatts of consumption. That's probably pretty close to what it's going to level out as, because it's really not going to get much worse than this, because we are unlikely to build any more labs, and most of them are going once rocket launches slow down, which they eventually will, because once we hit 1 million science in the network, then we don't need to constantly launch rockets anymore, because we've saved up everything we need for the final research. So the only launches we'll do are going to be on demand from that point forward. But as far as our plastic setup now with butane, it is still essentially maxed out on it. And in a way, we might want to prioritize using the butane if at all possible. And I think we actually could do that if we put 2 overflow valves there. and let's say a pump in here from butane. That will make sure that butane has priority in all of this. Let's put another pump down here to help. And it's basically constantly making plastic. The limitation here is probably just the inserters. But let's see here. There we go. That's 150 plastic a second. And I think we needed to give butane priority just because it's a byproduct of our science, just as it is a byproduct of plastic. But science uses the other items, whereas plastic turns it into plastic. So if we did nothing, we would just be overloaded on butane. So we need to force it to get used first. And it seems to be working. Butane's at full blast, and the butane tank is full, which is fine. It was balanced around this setup's use of plastic, so as butane comes in from other places, it won't be balanced out, but as long as it has priority, it will eventually get cleared, so I think that's pretty good. We've got half of the science packs done, and it seems to be going pretty fast. Our glass setup is working nicely, and I'm especially happy that all of our power setups are working. I would really like to go into deuterium power because it seems like we need so much power at this point that's basically going to be mandatory. Not necessarily mandatory, but we already have this many thorium reactors. Are we going to jump across the way here and make more? Or is this Factorio's way of telling us we should build some deuterium reactors out here? I'm thinking it's that second thing. Although our factory is pretty stable right now in the sense where rockets are launching and they have things to launch, we're already up to 75 out of 100 of the thrusters, so at some point we're going to need to research other components to launch, like hull components. But to do that, we're going to have to stop researching faster than light theory. And if we don't upgrade purple first, then it means we're going to be wasting a lot of time with slow research, while our factory basically idles. So at this point, I think the next thing we need to work on is going to be upgrading our purple science to 75 items a second. That will allow us to start researching spaceship parts without wasting any research time. Before we work on our purple science here, one thing we might want to think about is doing some deuterium fuel. And the way we get it changes how we process used up thorium. Because in order to make the deuterium fuel cells, we need the Muon fusion catalyst, and that is acquired only from the advanced version of thorium reprocessing. So the recipe is twice as big as the regular processing, so you can just multiply the numbers times 2. It's the same amount of neptunium. You get no thorium back. It's the same amount of uranium-234, but you get a 13.33% chance of the Muon catalyst. But what you don't get is any curium back. So since previously the curium was a 75% return on what went into it, this will actually quadruple the amount of curium you need in order for thorium to run. So you don't really want to do this all of the time unless you have a setup that is designed for that. And I don't think I want to do that because deuterium fuel has so many gigajoules in it, 80, that turning it on and off in any way or form probably won't really work because it's just going to waste energy. The only way that would work is with a really complex circuit network that turned individual reactors on and off at a very precise and consistent time. So in other words, like 95% accumulator, 90, 85, 80, or even more precise than that. So instead, my thought process here is to consider deuterium fuel as essentially an always-on power source, kind of like solar panels in a way. Now, it'll turn off if the accumulators get to 100%, if it can turn off. But because the fuel level is so high that it's not really practical to turn the reactor on and off or disconnect it from the network or anything like that. Like once it's on, it stays on. And there's only one way of reprocessing the fuel cells. That one catalyst goes into a single fuel cell. And then when you reprocess 5 fuel cells, you get 4 of them back and then 95% chance of a 5th. So in other words, 99% of the catalysts come back every time. So they last an extremely long time. But it does require that you create a very large buffer because you're going to need a muon for every single fuel cell that you're going to use. And if we look at our numbers, there's a hidden decimal point here that these are the average number of fuel cells per reactor. That currently thorium has 19 fuel cells per reactor, and each reactor is in a group of 4. So that means we would need approximately 80 fuel cells just for a single group of 4 reactors. which means we would need to acquire 80 of the muons. So it's kind of difficult. However, we can use logic for this, and since this is going to take time, we can just set this up now and then get back to it later. And I notice there's some white circuit boards that are requested. That could just be a throughput thing, and it seems to be, but like everything else, that part has been upgraded, so it could be faster. It's probably not greenbelt levels of fast, but that should help it. The factory needs all the help it can get now with these huge researches. So right now our logic for handling the fuel cells, and we got a huge selection of them right there. Probably should turn it off for now, just so we have a lot of them on hand. So the way this works right now is if we don't get enough curium back from reprocessing the thorium cells, then plutonium is forced to turn on, which it is right now, in order to boost up the curium. We can use that same logic to make sure that we never run out. So how about right now we set the desired amount of curium to 200 pieces instead. So now the plutonium reactors will just always be on until they get to that. And that won't really be a problem because the plutonium reactors are only this. They say only, it's like 8 gigawatts. Compared to thorium, which is more than 30, the plutonium is just a little help. It doesn't make an enormous dent in the factory. And as far as the numbers, if you look at these two processing recipes, one is 400 seconds and the other is 800 seconds, but the recipe is twice as big, which means we don't really have to do anything special with it. We can just copy it. And it would be cool if we can use this same belt setup. Kind of want to reverse how these are done here. So let's put it on that side. Of course, all these belts are yellow, so probably should just switch them now so we don't have to deal with that. So if this worked for 5 for the regular recipe, then it means it'll work for 5 of the advanced as well. And we're probably going to need to actually space this out a bit. Let's wait for the robots to deliver them first. And we need somewhere to store our catalysts. The input for the fuel is just going to be catalyst and deuterium, so they could come from anywhere, really. And there is some amount of space out here. For now, since we don't know where it's going to go, how about we just kind of sort it up here. So let's space these out. Make them long-handed. We'll have the output here. It's mostly the same, except let's do a buffer chest for the catalyst, and it looks like they stack in units of 1. So actually, let's use our bigger buffer chest. No, but let's just say 70 so it's not completely full. So that pulls off to the side. And everything else will get sent to where it needs to go. So the logic is controlled in part by the plutonium reactors because they're just going to keep running until curium gets above 200. However, we don't want to be making catalysts if our curium gets too low because we need the curium to make the thorium. And there are 2 conditions which would cause us to want to make the catalyst. First, let's bring the muon signal in here, and it goes across these 2. So our goal is approximately 70, but I guess we can just set that to 80 anyway. So the first condition that we should be making the catalyst is if we have less than, let's say, 70 of them. And actually, it might be better just to do the buffer here so we can get exactly 80, which is probably the number we want. So if it's less than 80, green square. The other one requires that we have a sufficient amount of curium on hand so we don't have to make more. So curium has to be equal to or greater than 100. And if so, green square. So we'll hop it across all of the input inserters, and their condition for running is it has to be equal to 2, because both of those have to be true. And we actually need to connect the wire. There we go. So now it's trying to turn on to make those catalysts. And we don't want these to fight with the other side, which means we want them to work in an inverse condition. So if these require 2, then this will be green is equal to or less than 1. So either one or the other will run. And we can kind of test this where we have the off signal and we disconnect that. They turn on and the other ones turn off. But we gotta spread that across there. So that way only one or the other will work, because either we are short on curium and need more, or we have enough curium and we need to make the catalyst. And if we have enough catalyst, then it will just go back to converting to curium, but the production of curium is based on the plutonium reactor, so we don't need any additional logic besides this. But we do have all these cells very quickly building up, so we gotta pick this up, make a bunch of junk. Hold on. There we go. So we put them all in, and for now, it's doing it with the advanced version, because we do still have enough curium, but just barely. So let's see what we get. Oh, we did get a catalyst. And we got another one. That was pretty lucky. And why isn't that one running? It was not flipped. There we go. Oh wow, we got some 234 there as well. It's a lot of random little items, but that's the cool thing about reprocessing, and specifically doing with a belt, because then you can see these rare resources just sort of moving their way along the chain here. Hey, we got another catalyst. Actually getting them pretty quickly. And even more 234. Well, cool. We'll just have to let that run then, and keep an eye on Circuit HUD to see what happens with curium. As long as it stays at least above 100, ideally between 100 and 200, then we should be good. Okay, it dropped below 100, which turned off the input inserters for the advanced version, and now the standard version is running, which does create the curium. So we got our 100 pieces, and now the input inserters for that side have stopped, and the other side is running. And since we have so many of them right now, they're both kind of running at the same time, but more or less that's what's going to happen anyway. So they're both going to cycle on and off as they need to. So it seems good. It would be nice to have the catalysts on our circuit HUD, and we're doing that with this giant line of combinators. So to do this is going to require one more of them. I guess I could use filters on the circuit HUD mod, but I don't know. This has been working so far, so I don't see a need to change it. And here we go. We've got our catalyst in there. The list is getting long again. It looks like we're basically going to have it just wrap over, but maybe we can get one more item in there. It's a lot to follow. That's why I have this window open, is because you just kind of want to constantly see what's happening with power, because with the power demands, 56.6, is that another record? Feels like it. With our power demands being so high, keeping an eye on our fuel sources is really important. But seems good. It just takes a really long time to get these catalysts. But once you have enough, then it's self-sustaining. And looks like we just hit more than 1,000 rocket launches. And I'm guessing, there goes some more, that we're about halfway through the launches, because we've got 470,000 science packs of our goal of 1 million. We've got a lot of spaceship parts to launch too, but hey, we're making pretty good progress. It's been fairly uneventful, and that's a good thing. That's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to upgrade our purple setup to increase our research speed for faster than light theory, as well as send more spaceship parts into space. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.